Before we dive into today's episode, I want to tell you about an event you do not want to miss: the Control and Counter Seminar. This hands on seminar focuses on weapon defenses and is led by two of Krav Maga Worldwide's top instructors. John Pascal, a six-degree black belt and director of Krav Maga Worldwide's Force Training Division, brings over 40 years of experience and has trained thousands of law enforcement officers and military personnel. CJ Kirk, a fourth degree black belt and deputy chief instructor of Krav Maga Worldwide, has been teaching Krav Maga for more than 20 years, helping students and instructors alike build life saving skills. The seminar will be held at Strategic Operations in San Diego, a premier training facility known for its state of the art real life scenario environments. Whether you're a student, instructor, or licensee, this is your chance to excel with advanced weapon defenses in a world class training environment. Spots are limited, and as a podcast listener, we're giving you exclusive access to register at kmwcalendar.com/control and counter. Now let's get into the episode. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Krav Maga Worldwide official podcast. I'm your host today, Joel Ellenbecker, and I'm excited to bring in a series to the podcast called Inside KMW. So in this series, we're going to interview school owners, instructors, students to get to know the members of our community, why they do Krav Maga, how they got started, their background, their community. We have such an amazing, diverse, and awesome group of people all around the world, and I'm really excited to share them with you, to introduce you to them, and also to get to know them better myself. So today I am joined with Ken Richstad from Krav Maga Raleigh, and I'm really excited to have this conversation. Ken and I have gotten a chance to train with each other a few times over the years and get to know each other. He's a really awesome guy, and I think you guys are going to love getting to know him as well. So Ken, if you want to just start, maybe just give us a quick little brief bio and introduction of who you are.
Sure. I run Krav Maga Raleigh, which is in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I've been running that school since 2008. We had our 16th anniversary last year.
Amazing.
And Joel, you and I have some similarities in our backgrounds because I also started doing karate. I started when I was 6 years old, which was a long time ago at this point. I was 6 years old and I watched the Ninja Turtles movie, right? The original Ninja Turtles movie, which, by the way, it still holds up, and I think everybody should go watch it again. So I watched
Yes.
that. Like any 6 year old, I said, Mom and Dad, I want to do that. And they were, gracious enough to, help me do that. They, found a karate school that turned out to be a really great program. And I trained that, growing up. I also did some like stand-up jiu-jitsu, Japanese jiu-jitsu there. One thing led to another. I grew up in South Carolina, but after I went to college, I moved to Los Angeles because, and I'm sure this will come as a huge surprise, knowing from somebody that moved to Los Angeles, I wanted to do martial arts and movies, right? I've been doing it
Awesome.
my whole life growing up. I love movies. I was like, well, this is just the natural thing. So I went out there, and of course, this was 2006. So LA, that's where Krav Maga Worldwide was headquartered at the time. And I happened to move to an apartment that was just like 15 minutes away from the West LA headquarters. And in LA, being 15 minutes away from something is like nearly impossible. So it was a really good coincidence. I was familiar with Krav Maga because I'm pretty sure that my first exposure was the Black Belt magazine that had Darren on it, because
Oh,
we had that at my karate school. So I'd read about it in there, and I didn't know much about it. I didn't really even understand, you know, reality-based self-defense or whatever you want to call it. I just knew that it looked cool. That's really what it was. I mean, I'd started martial arts because it looked cool, and I moved to LA. I was like, well, Krav Maga looks cool. Why don't I try that? And I did. My first class, I think Ida Anderson, if I was my first instructor. We did choke from the front, two-hand pluck. We did some drills that I almost died doing, even though I was a like relatively fit 22-year-old. At the very least, I was young and springy, and I signed up. From there, it was really just a one thing led to another. Eventually did phase A. I started teaching some adult classes and a lot of KMX in Los Angeles. I moved to Raleigh because I had friends moving to Raleigh. I had some friends already lived there and some that were moving. And I do think Los Angeles is a really cool city, but it can be difficult to live there. You know, it's big, it's expensive, traffic's bad. So to me, the trade-off wasn't worth it. And also I was 24. Like, I'd moved somewhere every couple years anyway. It's like it was really no big deal just move across the country. I'd just done it a couple years previously, so I kind of just didn't even think about it. Yeah, moved to Raleigh, and then it was really one thing led to another, and I opened my school.
Oh, that's awesome, Ken. Yeah, I mean, I knew that you had trained martial arts, but I didn't know that you too saw the Ninja Turtles, and that's what wanted you to get started.
Oh yeah, wait, was that what it
Um,
was for you?
yeah, I also had a little bit of Power Ranger influence as well.
Oh yeah, I knew we were kindred spirits, Joel.
That's great. Okay, so when you first moved to LA and you went into the Krav Maga school, what were some differences that stood out to you between your traditional training and this new Krav Maga thing that you didn't know much about?
Let's see. At the time, I really wasn't introspective or reflective enough to really tell. Um, and it was also, of course, a new city, everything like that. So, things that stand out to me were um, the size of the facility. That West LA was quite a large facility. So it was large, it was much more modern feeling compared to martial arts schools that I've been in. And, like the first thing I did was they had this video that was probably a VHS tape. Maybe it was a DVD, but it was like a 2 minute, what is Krav Maga video. And, certainly like a professionally produced video about your martial arts school was new to me. At that time, there wasn't, it was just gym clothes, shorts and t-shirt. Not even, it wasn't even like a requirement to wear Krav Maga top or bottom. So certainly it felt more modern and contemporary. Training in shoes. That I think I trained barefoot for a long time because I was just a stubborn holdout to my roots. But most people are training in shoes, and all the stuff that really does make Krav Maga special, I wasn't aware of at the time.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I had a little bit of a different experience where I trained in a traditional karate, well, it was like American freestyle type karate program. However, my instructor had went through phase in like 1998 or 99, early 2000, that era. So he had infused a lot of Krav Maga into our training. So for me, when I started doing Krav Maga, I was like, this feels awesome. The one thing that stood out was like, I get to kick people in the groin like that.
Right.
As a young 18-year-old, that I just thought that was cool. And now I'm like, oh, it makes sense. If our objective is to go home safe, there's no rules. We got to do what we can, to protect ourselves.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, and it sounds like, I mean, it's not like you chose Krav Maga Worldwide specifically. It was just that happened to be right next to where you were. Was there any thought process into like, I'm going to go to a certain organization or a certain school, or it was just there, so you chose it?
Yeah, it really was just there. I'm very lucky that, I moved to LA. I found an apartment on Craigslist, and that apartment was near the West LA Training Center. And I'm really glad, if I had happened to find an apartment that was, somewhere else, like further into Santa Monica, or when I moved out there, I did specifically look for Krav Maga. The other thing I was looking for was there's a martial artist named Dan Inosanto, fairly famous, and the Inosanto Academy, uh, at the time, I'm sure it still is there, is in Los Angeles or the greater LA area. And I remember that Krav Maga Worldwide was about 15 minutes one direction, and the Inosanto Academy was about 15 minutes the other direction. And so I went to Krav Maga Worldwide first. You know, if I had, decided to go to the Inosanto Academy first, or if I just lived a little closer there, or who knows, I could have lived up in the valley and gone to the Sherman Oaks location. And, it's really amazing to me that it has been, such a great influence in my life for the training, but also my whole career. Like I have no idea what I'd be doing right now if I hadn't started doing Krav Maga. And a lot of that is because I happened to find this apartment on Craigslist. Um,
Yeah.
and you never know what the other path would have been. Maybe I would have found it anyway. But at the time, I was a very, very naive, not reflective, or certainly not forward thinking. I was just like, this looks cool. Ah, it's in driving distance. I didn't have a job when I moved out there, so I was like, oh, they got class at 10:30 in the morning on Monday. That's perfect.
Nice.
I'll wake up early and go. You know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, I think one other thing that's really awesome is, a lot of the, licensee school owners or Krav Maga instructors around the world travel to LA or, other training locations to get certified, to get experience, and then they kind of go back out. Whereas you had, an experience where you got to start there, learn there, and then move away. I know there's other people like that, but I think I always thought that was cool. Like, Kelly's been on the podcast before, and she's a huge part of Krav Maga Worldwide. And I know she talks about how like you were working with her or assisting her when you were first out there too.
Oh yeah, and Kelly. I'm pretty sure taught the second class I ever took
Oh,
there.
that's awesome.
Yeah, so I think Ida was the first class, but yeah, Kelly taught the second class, and I took a lot of her classes as a student because she taught a lot of the midday classes, and those were the ones I tended to take like 10:30 or noon. And then when I started teaching, I assisted with her, which I mean, she's a great person to assist with anyway, but also it was that schedule. I was when I moved out to LA, I started teaching karate first. That was like the first job I got because I had a lot of experience teaching karate. But so I just had that schedule that every martial arts instructor has, right? Where you basically work from like 5 p.m. to sometime in the evening. So those midday times were the best ones for me. Um, and yeah, so I took a lot of Kelly's class as a student. I assisted with her a lot, and I was lucky with my open schedule. I got to take classes from a lot of people that a lot of the instructors that many people in many licensees would only see at phase. I got to take their classes all the time. I took level 2 from Michael Margolin, right?
That's awesome.
Um, yeah, and then I could assist with them. I could hang out and watch, and I was kind of like a bum, right? So I just or if I taught at noon and at 4 o'clock, I was probably hanging out trying to you know kill time so I could see other instructors. Yeah, I mean, I think almost anybody who is a face instructor or has been, I was probably lucky enough to also get to have them just as an instructor.
Yeah, that's really cool. What was it like transition? Because you said you had the kids and the karate background. So
Mhm.
what was it like transitioning to a Krav Maga instructor? Was it something you asked about? Did they ask you, or like how did that transpire?
Oh yeah, so this is a funny story. So yeah, I was teaching at the kids' karate school, and I actually, uh, I actually got fired.
Oh no.
Yeah, it was a mismatch in personalities, and looking back, like I think I was a pretty good teacher, and the kids liked me, and their parents liked me, but I was definitely not fitting in with the overall um, direction and culture of the school I was working at. And although ultimately you gotta, everyone has to fit. A lot of it was just me being kind of rebellious and stubborn and thinking that I knew best, stuff like that. And I did learn a lot from that school. It was an all kids program, and they had kids from 3.5 to 13, 14, but a lot of like 3.5 to 12 was the bulk of it. They had a few locations. The one I was at, they were successful. The one I was at had 220 students, all in that age range, and I taught 13 classes a week.
Nice.
So the other guy I taught with, who was the head of that school, he was a really excellent instructor, and there were other really good instructors in this program. So I really learned a lot from them about teaching kids and just about teaching in general. So I was lucky I was able to cut my teeth a little bit there. And then the transition to teaching Krav, yeah, it's with the KMX classes. I assisted for a long time. First, I assisted with the junior a lot and Matt Ramon. So I definitely got to try to follow their lead. And anytime I didn't, I always ended up like kind of screwing something up. So it was another instance of like getting ahead of myself, thinking that I knew more than I did. Um, and same thing with with teaching adults, at least in LA, they had such a large instructor cadre that, I went through phase, and then the first thing I did was assist with other instructors. And I was teaching classes by myself before I moved. But, the times that Krav Maga Worldwide has such a good, strong teaching method and teaching format that the times that I followed that and stayed, on task and followed the format and the senior instructors, that's where I got better and where I learned. And anytime I thought I knew something on my own, I can look back and be like, well, that was a huge mistake. So I don't know if I even answered your question.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
I think it's great to that's a big testament to like having mentors and having instructors that are guiding us and sharing what's worked for them and what hasn't, and like you said, the teaching methodology. I don't know what your experience was like, but before going to phase training, which is our instructor development program, before doing that, I had taught a lot too in the kids and karate programs and stuff. And it was a lot of informal, like, here's some tips. Maybe we get together and work out a little bit and work on some techniques. But there was no like teaching how to teach necessarily, or really. I think one thing that I benefit a lot from with phase is the deep dive into just like living and breathing the martial
Mm.
art, for a week or 5 days or whatever the length of the course is. I think there's such a big benefit to that. So, um, basically, you were helping out, assisting, being around a little bit, and then at some point they're like, "Hey, you need to go to phase."
So going back to me getting fired from that karate program. So I got fired, and that led me to think, well, I need another job, right? Because I was working full time at that program, and it was a pretty good job. And so I got fired. And first, I spent a month like watching all of the Family Guy DVDs and DVD extras. Which, I mean, I think I did apply for some other jobs during that time, and then I realized like, oh, maybe I could work at Worldwide. So I wasn't as experienced, and my impression, especially from doing traditional martial arts, is like the way to teach is you train for about 14 years and then you just can teach. So I knew nothing about instructor development and formalized processes. But as my savings were dwindling, I became more creative in my thoughts, right? And I thought I did have a lot of experience teaching kids, and I know that's very valuable. And it's like a separate skill besides your actual knowledge of the specific martial art. Is do you have this ability to teach kids? So I I can't remember if I wrote or talked to someone in person, but I just said like, "Hey, I've had a lot of experience teaching kids. I'm interested in working, in the KMX program if you're hiring." I didn't know what phase was or anything like that. And it was on a Friday. No, that wasn't a Friday, but shortly I had an interview on a Friday. So I walked in, it was Matt and Kelly. And I remember it was a Friday because I said, "Can you come back tonight? Phase A just started."
Oh
Because
man.
yeah, in LA at the time they're doing in-house phases, which spread out over 2 weeks. It was like Wednesday through Sunday for 2 weeks. And I was like, sure, I can come back tonight. I don't have a job, right? And so I came back. I came back that night, and it was like day 3 of phase, and they just kind of like, I just tried to catch up as fast as I could. Um, and again, I had no idea what I was getting into, but that's how I got into teaching. Um, and it was so I did definitely start teaching kids first. Uh, I got through the phase. I started teaching kids first, and then assisting in the adult classes before I was able to have some adult classes of my own.
Just to add a little bit of context for anybody listening who might not know, the phase instructor course for phase A, which Ken is talking about, is typically nowadays a 7 day course, 8 hours of training every day. We're going through all the techniques in level one in depth, trying to get whatever level of the person that is attending, trying to get them to a black belt level at level one techniques in that short amount of time, also learning how to teach the techniques. And then at the end, there's a test on the curriculum physically, a teaching test, and then also a written test. And in order to become a certified Krav Maga Worldwide instructor, they need to pass all of those things. So for Ken to not know what he's getting into and then just walk into it, that's quite the experience, I'm sure.
Yeah, I definitely didn't know what I was getting into. And in a way, it's for me, that's usually the best because then I couldn't have had any second thoughts or anything like that. I was just like, okay, I guess I'm showing up tonight and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think if with a lot of things for me, if people would be like, "Oh yeah, it's going to require all of this," I don't know if I would do it. So
Yeah,
sometimes,
right.
yeah,
Sometimes you don't want to know.
yeah, sometimes it's better just to follow the passion and figure it out as we go, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool. So you went through phase, passed. How long did you stay out there? How many instructor courses did you do while you were in LA before you decided to move?
That was the only course I did in LA before I moved.
Okay,
There was a phase B right before I moved that I did. It was again that would in-house, so it was 2 weeks, and I did 1 week of it, but I didn't finish it before I moved, and so I ended up doing phase B again. Let's say I moved in 2008, so I would have done phase B in 2009 at some point, and then
cool.
yeah, all the rest of them have been uh, normal, I guess I'd say, making quotes over here with my fingers.
So you got this really amazing experience to kind of learn and be in the mecca of Krav Maga in Los Angeles, learning from Kelly and Michael and Matt and like all these really amazing practitioners. Then you decide to move back home, and you had said earlier, like traffic and cost of living and all those things. Was that just starting to get to be too much? I know for just teaching, classes, it can be hard to have that be like a full time career.
Yeah, it's hard to say chicken and egg which one kind of came first. So I started teaching at Worldwide, and they were able to keep me fairly busy, especially with the kids programs, especially over the summer. I think there were just more classes, and they did say that if I wanted to, I could move towards like a full-time job with probably some administrative duties, which from my previous experience, I knew that I didn't want to do that, and also it would be bad for our relationship uh, because I just honestly, I just knew I wasn't going to do a good job at that, and I don't know at what point I had thought about moving, but I had two really good friends from college, uh, one who lived in Virginia, one who lived in New Hampshire, and the one that lived in Virginia, he got a job in Raleigh in North Carolina, and the other one, they were really, they were best friends. And then the other friend said, "Well, hell, I'll move to Raleigh as well." And I thought, well, okay, I'm just here in LA, kind of like working. Like I did really love Krav and teaching, but um, it was I didn't have like a really compelling reason to stay there. And I had moved. So I finished high school. Actually, after high school, I moved to Japan for a year. And then I went to college. And because I had taken a year off, I did college a little faster. So I was there for 3 years. Then I moved to LA. So like every couple of years I was moving. It was just no big deal to
Yeah.
move. And I didn't have a lot at stake necessarily. So I thought, oh, hey, my friends are going to Raleigh. I'll go to Raleigh. And I'm from South Carolina, so I knew I liked the Southeast. And I did know Raleigh. So Raleigh actually that year, even though it wasn't why I made the decision, it was actually rated the number one city to live by Forbes. They do their lists. So I just had this impression as like, well, it's a great place to live. I know the Southeast. My family's back that direction. I'll have friends there. Um, yeah, so that's why I moved.
And then
Okay.
I think what would be interesting too, it's like how does someone go from doing martial arts for a long time and stumbling into Krav Maga, getting certified, teaching there, and then you're back in Raleigh. Like, how do you end up owning a school and changing all these lives and developing all these
Uh,
instructors? Like, how did you get there?
yeah. Yeah. So I really like until the last couple of years, you really could describe, my path here as just, well, one thing led to another. Um, um, I moved to Raleigh. I did not intend to open a Krav Maga school, and I also had no idea what licensing was or anything like that. I remember before I moved, somebody at LA, I think it was just one of the other students, or maybe an instructor saying, "Oh, you could go be a licensee," and like that phrase just bounced off my ears. It didn't register at all. I figured I'd move out there and probably work for another karate school or something because there's tons of karate schools, and I still had a good resume there. And I specifically did not want to like own a school or something. I did think that I could teach private lessons in Krav because there's certainly in North Carolina, there was very little Krav Maga, and there's none in Raleigh when I moved out. And at that time, you would charge someone, in my experience, would charge $100 for a private lesson. And when you're a 24-year-old who's done phase A, like $100 is like the most anybody has gotten paid for anything. You may as well be a billionaire, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, I'll teach a few private lessons and teach karate and I'll be rich. Um, so I moved out to Raleigh. This was, we had lots of internet in 2008, but it wasn't nearly as like fleshed out and connected as it is now. So I found students by getting online and looking. I think I just typed. I guess we had Google Krav Maga in Raleigh or Krav Maga in North Carolina, and I found Krav Maga Worldwide forums where people had gotten on and just said, "Hey, is there any Krav Maga in North Carolina?" And they'd asked this over the last, months and years. So I just responded to anybody who had mentioned Krav Maga in North Carolina and said, "Hey, I moved out here. I teach Krav, can do private lessons." And I think I posted in there that I was, available. And I actually ended up talking to enough people that I thought I should try to find a space to have a class. So I rented space 2 hours a week from a Pilates studio in downtown Raleigh. They had some extra space. They had open areas, open floor. And for $25 an hour, I rented, Tuesday and Thursday evenings, and just opened it up. I said, "All right, Krav Maga class is starting," and I had enough people to keep that going. I did that for a year, and then I had about 50 students. And I thought, again, one thing led to another. I thought, oh, I guess I got to find my own place. I had like 5 classes a week at that point, but they were all still, evening hours. Like, and I was kind of getting in the way of the Pilates school, which was also growing. So I was like, all right, I guess I need my own place. I asked the landlords of that building, and they're like, "We have something on the other side of the parking lot for you." Okay, I'll go in there. And I guess that at that point is when I really opened my school.
That's awesome. About when was that? Is
So
that
that
16 years ago? Or?
Yeah, so the Pilates studio that I opened, where I opened my first classes, that was 2008. And then right at about a year later in 2009 is when I moved to my own space.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's neat to hear how this just kind of built over time. And I mean, if you're able to accumulate, 50 students just by doing it, reaching out on forums and talking to people, you must have been doing something really well. And I'm sure the students were getting a lot of value out of that.
Thank you. It was, yeah, it's really interesting to think back on that. I had a website, but it was like a Squarespace website I built myself. I mean, there's no SEO, at least not in my head. I'm sure there was in the world, but SEO or Google ads or Facebook ads or, that all the stuff that I think is essential to survival now. Just I'm really lucky that I opened when I did, where I did, because it just was easier.
So at that point, when you're opening your school, is that when you reach back out to KMW and say, "Hey, what is that licensing thing?" What
So
someone's
actually,
mentioned that. It's been
no,
in the
actually,
channels of my brain somewhere.
so I actually had it backwards. I thought what you had to do, and of course I thought this because I didn't ask anybody. I just came up with this on my own. Was like you basically had to like build up a program and then apply to be a
Okay.
licensee. Like, hey, look at all of my students. Can we join your cool club? Which of course is backwards, right? So Kelly actually called me and she's like, "Are you teaching Krav Maga out there?" I was like, "Yeah, yeah. I'm trying to like build up a program so I can become a licensee." Um, and she's like, "Well, you're doing it backwards." I was like, "I'm glad you called me then." So, yeah. Um, so yeah. So again, I had no idea. Like, I couldn't even told you what licensing meant at that time, right? But that's how it happened. So she called me and I said, "Oh yeah, well if that's how to do it, then I definitely want to do that." And even then, I didn't know like, okay, we're gonna travel out to Phase all these times, and um,
What would
so
you say, because there actually, it's interesting. There's lots of Krav Maga schools even now, probably a lot more now just because it's grown over the years, but there's lots of people that are unaffiliated or running their own small programs or by themselves. What would you say are a few of the top benefits of being part of an organization, and being a licensee, being a school with Krav Maga Worldwide?
if you do things on your own or by yourself, you're only going to be as good as you are. And, you can learn and grow and develop on your own and seek out other training, whether it's the Krav Maga training or business training. But ultimately, you're the limit of your program if you're doing it by yourself. And so something that I've always been grateful for is being part of, KMW, is that like there's so much knowledge and ability and talent that as long as I seek it out and open to it and implement it, that I won't be limiting, my program, my growth, my instructor's growth, my students' growth. I mean, I honestly, like, for a long time, I did not seek that out. I kind of wanted to just be in Raleigh. Raleigh is about as far from Los Angeles as you can get, and I like traveling back there to train. But it's like I just want to be in Raleigh, have my little program by ourselves. We're not going to get involved. We're just going to go to phase, learn everything we can, come back, and that was very limiting. I didn't reach out to other school owners for business advice. I didn't reach out for more training or teaching things, but it was there. It was available. And it's way more available now that the structure has changed and that the schools are so much more connected. So yeah, if you do it on your own, like even if you're like the best in the world, it's going to be only you. And, one person I think is always going to be inferior to 1,000 people who have training and knowledge in that area.
Yeah, I don't know if you've had this experience, but for me, like it's really easy being in a bubble, being on our own to I don't know. I've definitely had this experience where I was like, "Oh yeah, I know everything there is to know about
Oh, yeah.
inside defense or
Yeah.
straight punch or whatever," like even as a black belt, it's like I've got it down. And
Hmm.
this last year with traveling around and getting to have more Krav Maga in my life, I was like, wow, there's so much more like depth and so much to learn from being surrounded by other people. So it's definitely made a huge impact on me for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even when you do have a ton of knowledge and experience on something, you've got to have a community that will either challenge or reinforce it or do both. Because otherwise you just stagnate.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if we're not growing, we're backsliding. And it's easy to like, especially during those courses, it's like we go there and we're testing and there's a lot of pressure and we want to get it right. It's hard to retain everything. So I've found a lot of value in going back to courses that I've already passed and just like absorbing more
Mm.
information. Or like you said, you would hang around at the school and watch classes. Like there's a lot to be said about learning in different ways. I think we all have our preferred way. Like I'm definitely like a doer. Like I like to do and feel and experience the things. I think that's the way I learn best. But it doesn't mean that watching or listening or those things aren't helpful to me as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, what would you say, with throughout your journey, was there any like big challenges or hurdles or obstacles that really stick out to you that got in the way?
Yeah, of course. Uh, so as a school owner or a practitioner and instructor, I imagine anybody has similar issues. Like one of the most difficult things for me was we moved locations, and there was a lot about moving that I didn't know. Like at least here in Raleigh, um, you can't just go anywhere you want to, right? It has to be the right kind of use. The city has to approve it. You have to do plans. Like we had to like go into this building and then move all the lights 5 feet to the left, stuff like that. And that was a real quagmire. So just logistically, that was a 2-year process. I signed the lease on the new place at the end of 2016. We moved there a year later, but we didn't actually like clear it with the city, like get the official approval to move until January 2019. So I hope they're not listening to this. I hope everyone else is listening except for them. Um, so that was incredibly expensive. We had 2 leases for a while. We had to do incredible amount of work, and I think it would be difficult no matter what. But the biggest issue was just the knowledge gap. I didn't even know what I was getting into. So like logistically, that was a big problem, and everybody's experienced rent going up or having to move, or all of a sudden half your students quit and you don't understand why. We have these things, But when I think about this question, really the biggest challenge was overcoming my belief that I knew everything already.
Mm,
And it's still something I'm working on, but I have made a lot of progress there. And it's like, if you don't let that get in the way, everything else is solvable because probably 1,000 people have been where you are and they can tell you what they did and what worked for them. Like this, this moving thing, I just assumed that we were in one building, we'd move to another. But there were plenty of people that could have told me what was going to be involved and what I should look out for. I just didn't even think to ask about it. Um, Recently, like the last couple of years, I hired a business coach who Eric Basic, who's in the Krav Maga community, and like it was part of that was just realizing like, hey, someone else knows how this works, and I should learn from them what they're doing. So the biggest challenge was me, and probably a lot of school owners, especially since things do kind of just come back to you and what you know and what you do, and what you don't know, what you don't do. That's the biggest challenge.
yeah, I think that's really great insight too of what, and we kind of mentioned it earlier, but it's like having that access, having people in the community who have walked the walk and who've already gone through the steps, being able to leverage their experience and learn from them, just speeds up results. And it also, makes the process a lot more enjoyable rather than bumping around in the dark, being like, "Oh, how do I do this? How do I figure it out?" It's like somebody has figured out a lot of the pieces already, and we can learn from them and grow from their experience as well. That's
Yeah, it's I mean it's always been there, just for everybody. When are we going to come around to that realization and get out of our own way?
yeah,
And some people are able to do that quickly or never at all. And some people, me included, it takes a long time. You really have to get over your own ego and change. For me, the mindset change has been getting away from like, oh, I know what to do, or no one, I don't need to listen to anybody else, to like not about what you know, but what your approach is. Right. Well, my approach is to find the person with the knowledge and ask them and then try to copy them. My approach is to try to be humble and not assume I know the answer. Because then you can still feel like you're doing the right thing. It's just, it doesn't, it doesn't make, it's not about saying, oh, I'm an idiot, I don't know anything. It's about, where you can feel good about yourself is that you're taking the right approach to things instead of trying to feel good by thinking you know everything, which of course is not true and never works.
yeah, I agree. You mentioned earlier, with the changes and stuff at KMW in the last year or so, being someone who's been a licensee for quite a long time, I know that a giant strength has been the instructor development and the Krav Maga training. But what have you noticed in the last year or so that's changed, that's been positive for you or helpful for Krav Maga Raleigh?
So, and we're talking about the structure of KMW and the licensing structure.
Yeah.
So, previous to the last year or so, I would have described the structure as a pyramid with headquarters at the top, which was at the time the LA headquarters and the staff there, and everything else goes up towards the top of the pyramid, including like sort of literally because a lot of the courses were in LA and especially the higher level ones. So everything went towards LA and then everything came from LA down. Now, I still would have had the opportunity to talk to other licensees and schools, but that structure wasn't there. The structure was up towards LA and that then down from LA out to all the schools. Now is much more of I'd call it a circle or a sphere, where the structure seems more lateral. Like for example, when we had that summit a year ago, and there were a lot of school owners there, a lot of instructors, and people I hadn't met, and never would have met otherwise. But now there's a connection back and forth. And in the last year, I've, I've talked to more school owners and instructors at other schools in the last year than I did in the 15 years leading up to it. And part of that is, my understanding that that's good for me and good for my school, but also because the structure has changed and it feels like that's what we should be doing. And even, there's still Fortitude and Krav Maga Houston, which are those are the headquarters now. At least that's how it seems to me. But it doesn't feel like they're at the top of a pyramid, more that they're at the center of a circle.
That's
Which
cool.
yeah, which makes you, as a licensee, certainly makes me feel like I'm part of something, part of a network instead of, part of the base of a pyramid.
What have your thoughts been about like us bringing coaching into the organization and the courage coaching certification?
Well, I enjoyed it a lot. Of course, I went through it, so I'm gonna I'm gonna be, of course, supportive of it. Um, for a long time, as I was going through the worldwide training, I did think that what I really wanted to see added was leadership. There's a lot of uh, Krav Maga training and there was instructor training. And I did think, especially as probably as I got, my black belt and was getting a little bit more mature and realizing like what else goes into being a good instructor and being a good school owner is, you know, the the non-martial arts skills.
Hmm.
And that coaching is certainly a great additional track. For me, I've been able to use it to try to improve my leadership and also just uh, my interactions with the students. Because ultimately, like we do teach Krav Maga, we teach it as well as we can, but technical details of telling someone how to pivot on a punch is just part of what we do, you know. And whether it's a student or another instructor, another staff member, like what people want is they want to grow, they want to become better versions of themselves. No one comes into a Krav Maga school and says, "My life and my sense of self is perfect. I
Yeah.
just also want to train Krav Maga," right? Like there's something that they want to achieve, some change they want to make, and Krav Maga is the medium. It's the method that they believe will help them make that change, and we believe we can do that for them as well. Having having the leadership, having the character development is also a big part of that. And some people are able to do that intuitively, or they make the effort to learn it on their own as instructors and leaders. But certainly having it more formalized is a huge addition.
Yeah, I feel like it adds a whole nother skill set or tool set to our toolbox to just support ourselves, and help achieve our mission of improving and saving lives. Something you said in there just kind of triggered something I was thinking earlier in the conversation of just it's so neat how Krav Maga and the principles of Krav Maga, like people come in, they have whatever they have going on, and they want to maybe learn self defense and get in shape. But it's neat to me how the principles of Krav Maga apply to lots of areas of life. Is that something that you've noticed too?
Oh, it's brilliant. Yeah. In fact, I remember in when I started at LA, they had a handbook for the students. It was spiral bound. It had the curriculum, had some explanations of Krav Maga, and I think it was in that book. It also might have been in the yellow and red book, the complete Krav Maga book, where there was a brief aside about applying Krav Maga principles to your life. You have a problem at work. Okay, what's the immediate danger? What's the specific problem? What's your reaction to it? Can you use that reaction to, can you build on that reaction to have an effective solution to the problem? How do you continue from that problem? Um, yeah, the teaching method and the way of looking at problems and of transferring knowledge is just it's brilliant. And I use anytime I do use it, like if I have some other non-Krav Maga thing, if I try to apply that, it's just so helpful.
Yeah.
And I think, you could like if you're doing business training, they'll probably say, "All right, well, look at your problems. What's the most immediate problem, right? Okay, like what are you doing about it now? What should you be doing?" Like it's, break things down to small increments. Um, Teaching things or achieving goals. What do you do? Well, you break it down to smaller steps. You take one step at a time.
I was teaching a level one class the other day, and someone had mentioned to me, like, "Oh, I really like the way that you explain that." And I was like, "Man, I feel like the longer that I train, the more information I get, the more I'm around mentors and higher level instructors. It's like I learn these things, and they start out so complex in my head, but then as we get better, it's like we're just able to break down these complex problems and explain them in a digestible way that can click for people. And I think that's part of the byproduct of the principles and of Krav Maga training.
It really is incredible. So I remember when I moved out to Raleigh, I I played a lot of pickup ultimate frisbee, which I had done already, and it's a great way to make friends and meet new people. And I made a lot of really good friends from there, many of whom now train at my school. So it just
Right.
all worked out great. And I remember, so in frisbee, you have a few different ways to throw it. The backhand is kind of the easy one that almost anybody can at least muddle through. Then you have your forehand throw that's a little more challenging. And I remember watching someone try to teach a newer person how to throw a forehand, and the person teaching was really good at frisbee, but I was watching him like, you are teaching them all wrong. It's like, you're not breaking it down enough. You're standing too far apart. You're making it too hard. Like you're not doing any dry work.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
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 we've talked about that in another podcast too. It's just how the teaching methodology, that we learn through the Krav Maga Worldwide system can be applied to just everything. And I'm sure you could have went over there and bust out a teaching template for ultimate frisbee.
yeah. Yeah, it really is remarkable. And it's like we've said this a few ways already, this podcast, but like every time I think I've got the whole picture of it, some time passes, I learn more, or I do more introspection, and I realize like it's even more brilliant and more simple than I thought it was.
Yeah, agreed. So on that note, what about the handgun mastery course? Like, how does that fit in? Because I know you were able to attend that this year too.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a great course. We do a lot of weapon defenses in Krav Maga. And, if you think about, okay, we do a lot of punch defenses, but we also throw punches, right? We do a lot of
Mhm.
kick defenses, we also throw kicks. So, whether or not some people have zero guns, some people have a million guns or somewhere in between, some people, like I don't own a gun, but I do shoot what I would consider fairly often. I keep up with that training, both for training and also because it's fun and interesting. But even past all that, it's like, you got to be on both sides of things. If you're doing handgun defenses, then you got to be on the other side of a handgun. Um, and if you're going to be on the other side of it, you may as well learn how to do it well. For people who want to have, the ability to use a handgun defensively, then it's even better because now you're getting really good training on it. Something Yeah, something we started doing a few years ago was just at my school, which is a small step to that, is just making sure that a few times throughout the year for our level 4 and higher students, we had a workshop where we brought in a bunch of real guns, unloaded, um, but trained with them. So, you feel the weight, you feel like, ow, that really hurts my hand. These are a lot sharper than our wax guns. And something I'm working on this year is one way or another, logistically, I'll figure it out, is it'll be a requirement to do handgun shooting if you're in level 4 and higher. Because again, you have to. It'd be like if we only did punch defenses or only threw punches and never did punch defenses. Like,
Yeah.
um, okay. So anyway, the handgun mastery course itself was a great course, really high rate of learning. Yeah, everything you want from Krav Maga, right? Simple, effective. But then the deeper important thing is like if you're doing handgun defenses, you got to know what it's like to be on the other side of it. And if you're going to shoot, you may as well learn to shoot well.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, Ken, I really appreciate our conversation today. I have just a couple fast fire questions to close out.
Great.
Do you have
I'll have
a do you
I'll
have
have
a
long
favorite
answers as is typical for a martial arts instructor.
do you have a favorite Krav Maga technique?
A couple stand out, and one that I really enjoy is like, all right, the technique names in Krav are kind of hilarious, but knife threat from behind, dead side, right? Um, so I really like that technique because uh, it's got that cool hand switch as you go for the Cavalier. Right, you step in, you redirect, you catch, you hit them. You got this cool hand switch, and we don't have a lot of fancy moves in Krav, and I wouldn't call that a fancy move, but it has a little bit more going on than some other stuff. And I just like every time I do it or I teach it, I always just end up smiling. So
Awesome.
I really enjoy that one. It's also, it's not like fancy for the sake of being fancy. It's just like, well, here's the best move to make. It involves a little hand switch. It feels really cool when you do it. It's like being a Krav ninja.
Yes.
Um, yeah. So I really, really like that technique.
What is one thing your students or instructors or staff would be surprised to know about
Okay, I'll try to make this a rapid fire answer. But
you?
there is a period, it was between when I was moving from LA to Raleigh, where I was actually homeless. It was,
I did not know that.
yeah, I hadn't thought about it in a long time until you brought it up as I was thinking about this answer. Um, as far as homelessness goes, it was pretty mild. I mean, I had a car, I had stuff, I had friends. I did sleep in my car a lot, but I also had friends I could stay with. I was in LA, which, the weather, like, I was in LA in the summer, the weather was fine. I was still working, but it basically happened because, I had kind of realized I was going to move, well in advance of actually moving. And I wasn't working full time, and I certainly wasn't going to try to work full time. So, just the money I was making didn't match the expenses I had. And I was like, well, okay, I'll just not pay for a place to live. I wasn't on a lease or anything. I was just month to month. And I think there was also part of me, actually, I know there's a part of me that like wanted to do it to kind of see what it was like, or maybe just to feel like I was doing something special. And yeah, so I slept in my car a lot, crashed on some couches. And I just did that until I moved to Raleigh, kind of like wound out my time there.
So we get to name this podcast From Homeless to Krav Maga Ninja. Is that what
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you can. And it wasn't like I grew up in poverty or homeless or anything, right? Like this was a temporary change in circumstances.
Yeah.
But certainly if you want to take a life lesson, it's that, things can really change.
I'm sure that the gratitude of just like being able to wake up and take a warm shower, when you want to, and that kind of stuff probably feels a little different after coming from that experience too.
Yeah, it is. That was almost 20, well, it was 16 years ago, 17 years ago, something like that. So it's so long ago that it doesn't actually feel like it was me doing it. But it is every once in a while good for me to reflect back on that and think, one thing that it helps me realize is like you can get through a lot if it's temporary. I certainly would not downplay anybody who has bad circumstances. But if it's temporary, like you can get through a lot.
I agree. What is one piece of advice that you would give someone considering Krav Maga?
I would say they probably have an idea of what they want to get from Krav Maga, and I would tell them that if they go into it and they really get into it and they enjoy it and go hard, they're going to get way more, not just way more than they think they're going to get, but way more than they can imagine getting. After 18 years now, I'm still discovering things that I have gotten from Krav Maga and discovering things that I will get from it. And I see that in my students and my staff. So the potential for growth in your, physicality, your mentality, your emotions is just unlimited. And you really can't even imagine what you're going to get from it. But just know that it's really amazing.
And that's awesome. Somehow we didn't say this at all, but Ken is a third degree black belt with Krav Maga Worldwide, and to be training for 18 years and still learning, still growing, I think is just a really amazing thing. And we really appreciate having you as a leader in our community. And it was really nice having the conversation with you today, Ken.
Thank you, Joel. I enjoyed this a lot.
Awesome. Talk to you again soon.
All right. Thank you, Joel.
Thank you for listening to the Krav Maga Worldwide Podcast. To access additional resources, read show transcripts, or to submit your questions and topic suggestions for future episodes, visit kravmaga.com/podcast.